Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and welcome back to another session on my Declassified Caribbean. Now, this evening, we are looking at a question that often generates more heat than light. Rather than relying on slogans or social media claims, we'll examine the historical record from the Windrush generation to more recent migration from Africa and ask what the evidence tells us about the contributions of both communities to Britain. This discussion isn't about diminishing anyone's contribution. It's about examining the historical record, and that's what we want to make sure that we emphasize. The history of Black people in Britain did not begin with the arrival of the Empire Windrush in 1948. It stretches back nearly 2,000 years to the Roman occupation of Britain. When the Romans conquered Britain in AD 43, their empire extended across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. As a result, people from many parts of the empire, including North Africa, lived and served in Roman Britain. Some were soldiers stationed at the Hadrian's Wall, while others were merchants, craftsmen, and administrators in Roman towns. Archaeological and historical evidence indicates that Britain's population during the Roman Empire or era was more diverse than was once believed. One of the best known figures associated with Roman Britain is the Ivory Bangle, Lady of York, a wealthy woman of mixed ancestry, including North African heritage, whose elaborate burial revealed her high social status. Another notable individual is Quintus Lollius Urbicus, a Roman governor of Britain in the 2nd century AD, who was born in what is now Algeria. While he was part of the Roman elite rather than local Britain, his career reflects the diversity of the Roman Empire and the movement of people across its territories. Fast forward to the 20th century, and Britain experienced another transformative chapter in its history. In 1948, the Empire Windrush arrived at Tilbury Docks, carrying hundreds of Caribbean migrants who had been invited to help rebuild Britain after the Second World War. Nurses, bus drivers, factory workers, teachers, engineers, and entrepreneurs from Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and other Caribbean islands became an essential part of British society. This generation laid the foundation for many Black British communities. In the decades that followed, migration from Africa also increased, particularly from countries such as Nigeria, Ghana, Somalia, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. African migrants made significant contributions in medicine, education, science, business, technology, public service, and the arts, further enriching British society. The contributions of both Afro-Caribbean and African communities have been immense. Afro-Caribbeans have helped shape British music through reggae, ska, lovers rock, and grime, transformed sport through figures such as Linford Christie and John Barnes, and influenced politics through pioneers like Dion Abbott. Africans have also made remarkable contributions with individuals such as Kemi Begnock in politics, Sir Mo Farah in athletics, and Professor Kevin Fenton in public health, alongside thousands of professionals whose work has strengthened British economy and institutions. So this evening's discussion is not about deciding which community has contributed more. Rather, it is about examining the historical record, understanding the different migration waves, and recognizing that both Afro-Caribbean and African communities have made profound and lasting contributions to modern Britain. By understanding that shared history, we can move beyond myths and appreciate the rich diversity. Now, so why is this discussion especially important today? Because questions of citizenship, immigration, deportation, and belonging have once again moved to the center of political debate, both sides of the Atlantic. In 2017, Britain was confronted with the Windrush scandal, in which many lawful residents from the Windrush generation were wrongly detained, denied health care and employment, or threatened with deportation because they could not easily prove their legal status. The scandal exposed serious failures in the government's immigration system and prompted official apologies and compensation schemes. Today, in 2026, immigration enforcement and deportation policies have again become a dominant political issue internationally, including in the United States during the Trump administration's renewed emphasis on immigration enforcement. That broader debate has also influenced discussions in Europe, including Britain and border security, migration, citizenship, and national identity. Against that backdrop, it is an appropriate time to revisit the history of Black Britain, not simply to look back with nostalgia, but to understand how different waves of migration have shaped the country. Afro-Caribbean and African communities did not arrive under identical circumstances, nor have they followed identical paths. Yet both have made extraordinary contributions to Britain's economy, public services, politics, sports, culture, and intellectual life. This evening's discussion is not about setting one community against another or deciding who has contributed more. It's about examining the historical record. And we're going to begin there with some history of how this all started. How did Black people begin this transformation of modern day Britain as it is? So let's look at a few clips. We're going to look at the controversies around this sort of, against Black Caribbeans versus African British people, and see where we are going to continue with this conversation. So let's look at the first one, which is going to give you a brief history of the Windrush generation. So I'm going to give that to you right now. So stay tuned as I put this on the screen, and then we will discuss as we go along. Okay, so let me get this here on the screen.
The Caribbean answered. Then Britain spent decades acting like it never made the call. So today, on Windrush Day, let's not do the watered down version of history. Met with tell the truth with a little piece of seasoning on it. Welcome to my Beat and Teach. On the 22nd of June, 1948, Empire Windrush arrived on Tilbury Docks. But let's be clear, many people who came from the Caribbean were not random immigrants. They were British subjects, which means that they came from countries that were colonized by Britain. After World War II, Britain was absolutely broken and the country needed rebuilding. Hospitals needed nurses, buses needed drivers, factories needed workers, and schools needed educators. So Britain looked to the Caribbean and said, hey, would you like to help? And they came. Caribbean nurses helped build the NHS. Caribbean men worked on London's buses and trains. Caribbean workers kept hospitals, factories, and public services moving. But when they arrived, some were met with signs saying, no dogs, no blacks, Irish. Can you imagine that? You can work in the hospitals, but struggle to pay rent for a room. You can drive the buses and trains, but be spat at in the street. You can pay taxes, raise children, build a community, but still be treated like you're trespassing in the street. And you know what? Our elders still got up and went to work the next day. That is strength. But then, decades later, the Windrush scandal happened. People who have been here for 40, 50, 60 years were told, prove you belong here. Some lost jobs, some lost homes, some were denied healthcare, and some were detained, and some were deported back to countries that they hadn't seen since childhood. So when people ask about why Windrush matters, tell them this. Windrush is not only Caribbean history. Windrush is not only Black British history. Windrush is British history, full stop. The NHS has Windrush fingerprints on it. The TFL has Windrush fingerprints on it. Modern day Britain has Windrush fingerprints dotted all over it. Hear this now. Whenever they come for beg nothing, them a call we overstand it. Meaning, Windrush didn't come to Britain to beg for opportunities. Britain went looking for Windrush. And the real question is, if they helped build Britain, why did Britain make them spend decades proving that they belonged? To all my Caribbean elders, I want to say thank you for the sacrifice that you made. Because without your trials and tribulations, I wouldn't know where we would be today. You will always and forever have my manners and respect. Happy Windrush Day. Guys, that was my beat and teach.
Okay, so that was a very good synopsis of the contributions of Caribbean citizens, right, to British culture. And notice that she said that we did not go seeking to go to Great Britain, that Great Britain came to the Caribbean and told the Caribbean that they had jobs there after World War II, after they had been devastated by that war and needed people to work. Now, the British people, the Caribbean people rather, when they docked in the UK, they were surprised to learn that the people there did not like them, neither did they welcome them there. Now, when we look at what is happening in our world today, where we're looking at those who are in the United States on TPS, the same thing happened, right? The United States demolished and devastated many of the countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. They went to the United States. The United States gave them this privileged status of the TPS, and then now it's revoking it. And the same thing happened in 1948, when the Windrush generation went to England and they were given the status of being, the subjects of Great Britain, and they had the opportunity, the privilege of working and remaining in Great Britain permanently. Fast forward to 2017, then Great Britain was reneging on its claims that they could work in the country and that they had legal status there, and started deporting some. So what we're seeing in our world today is history repeating itself. So let's look back at the history, at some of the history of the Windrush generation. The Windrush generation came to fill the labor shortages of post-war Britain. They worked in hospitals, on buses, in factories, and on building sites, doing the jobs that rebuilt that nation, of course, of Great Britain. The welcome they got was cold. Housing discrimination, no colored signs, limited where Caribbean people could live, pushing them into the poorest parts of the cities. Unemployment rate was high. Employment discrimination, though they were recruited to work, many found the jobs they were qualified for were closed to them. Social exclusion, pubs, dance halls, and clubs ran quiet collar bars. Violence. The 1958 Notting Hill riots saw white mobs attack Caribbean homes for several nights. Okay, so we look now at the 1960s to the 1980s. In the face of exclusion, Caribbean communities built their own. They built their churches. Many Caribbean Christians found white British churches unwelcoming, so they founded their own Pentecostal, Baptist, Seventh-day Adventists, which became the social heart of Caribbean life in Great Britain. Now, they also had their own community organizations, self-help groups, friendly societies, and community centers gave the support the state did not give to them. They also founded their own businesses, barbershops, restaurants, record shops, and groceries created both an economic backbone and a place to gather. Carnival was, developed by the Trinidadians, was a social form of perhaps, relaxing and entertainment and coming together of Caribbean people. And so Claudia Jones' Carnival of 1959 became the seed of Notting Hill Carnival, now Europe's largest street festival and a global event. And this was developed by Trinidadians and Caribbean citizens. We had the sound systems. Jamaican sound system culture reshaped British music from the dances of the 1960s to jungle, drum and bass, grime, and UK garage. The sonic innovations of the Caribbean diaspora changed the British musical landscape. So without Caribbean citizens, we would not have the same Britain that we are seeing in modern times. Now, let's look at some of the cultural transformation that Caribbean citizens contributed to also in Great Britain. Caribbean influence on British culture runs so deep that most people no longer see it as, look at the language. Words like bling, dis, yard, and vibes entered everyday British English from Caribbean patois. Now, we also have music, which we talked about, reggae, ska, lovers rock, jungle, drum and bass, grime, all either began to or were profoundly shaped by Caribbean British communities. Foods, let us look at foods and how Caribbean food actually, or foods, impacted British culture, or jerk chicken, curry goat, rice and peas, and plantain are now staples of British city life. Fashion, Caribbean people also impacted how British dressed and carried themselves. From Notting Hill Carnival costumes to streetwear, Caribbean style has shaped British style. And sports, or sport athletes of the Caribbean heritage have represented Britain at the very top, from Linford Christie to Raheem Sterling. So without a doubt, Caribbean cultures, right, and the region itself has impacted British culture, modern British culture, as it were. Now let's look at some other clippings to let you see how we have shaped modern British culture, because that's very important for us to understand. Because now that we're seeing a lot of things changing in the US, we're beginning now to make connections to see how history can be similar. So let me look at the culture shock of the Windrush generation as they went there. Many of them were disturbed to see that what they were promised was not what they were actually given. All right, so let's look at some of the people who are expressing their cultural shock when they actually went to Great Britain.
I really wanted to go back home, because things wasn't here like it was back home with family. I had a good family home, you see, so everything here to me was new, especially the way how they did things, and the hygiene thing and all that kind of business was terrible. I couldn't work with that.
So what, highlight some of those things?
Oh my God. First of all, you couldn't go into the bath and have a bath.
Why?
You didn't know if it was green or it was black or it was what.
Okay.
It was just filthy.
Okay.
The toilet, you couldn't see the basin down there.
Okay.
I spent ages pouring bleach, putting soda, putting all my hand down there to make it clean. It was just disgusting. So we went and buy a big plastic bowl, put it in the bath and have a bath. Couldn't put your foot in them bath. You couldn't. It was disgusting. I wanted to go home. My first real bad experience that I had is you have 4 burner and a cooker, and it's 10 pence each. So I tried to cook when nobody that there, so I kind of said, well, this day I put my pot on. Margaret came.
Who's Margaret?
Margaret is the girl who come to fetch me with Ken. And she came into the kitchen with a bowl, washing, not washing panties and brassiere. Margaret put the plates them in the soap, so what she wash the drawers them in, over the rock, and the sun dropping down on the cooker, and the drawers and the brassiere and everything spread on top of that. Now, can you imagine my eyes when we see that? I had to take the pot off the fire. So when the Jankro man him come now, himself did dinner already. Some said, me so scared, because me only young. So I said, no. I says, no.
How old was you at the time?
Me not turn 19 yet, is when me just come.
Okay.
And I says, no, it ain't ready. Him say, so how did you not already? Are you there from morning? You don't go to work. So I says, well, Margaret had the clothes on top of there, so I had to take off the patty. He said, what you mean have the clothes on top of there? So he went into the kitchen and see the knickers and everything spread on top of the plate and the soap out of the drip. So he go in the room and him call Lydia. And him say, is that you come to England for me? Give you shit for eat. That's what I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying it. And him say, it don't do nothing well. And the next thing, me see 2 teeth. Thump out on teeth. I felt so sorry, but what can I do? I had to tell the truth in it because I couldn't cook with the soap water dripping down on the things, Leanne. When we go into the house now, Pat, a white girl, live downstairs.
Okay, so can you imagine the level of what we call now cultural shock when you go into having left the Caribbean, gone to Great Britain, and you see that even hygiene, the people there were not that very hygienic. And, you know, you'd have thought that we're living in this very progressive country, much bigger than the Caribbean, and that was the motherland, as it were, and that we would have learned a great deal from them. But Caribbean citizens were learning that they were not, perhaps in terms of hygiene, we were way ahead. Now, how could that be? And I'm sure that would have really struck them quite hard when they went there. Let's look at some other experiences as we go along, and as you're joining, make sure you're liking the live, and so that it can be sent to other people on the platform. So let's now share we're looking at the Windrush generation and the rift, the conflict, as it were, between African Caribbeans and Black Caribbeans and Caribbean Blacks. Now, let's look now, hatred between. Let us look at this one here and begin to our discussion. So let me put that up on the screen. And look at what Gina is saying here. On the screen. Are you on the screen? Let me see if I can remove it and put it back on the screen. I don't know why it's not on the screen. So let me share it again with you and get it there. So the rift now between Caribbeans and Africans in the UK. Hopefully it will get there now. Out on the stage.
Yeah.
This is Windrush, right?
God.
Windrush came what is the Windrush? The 1930s?
Yeah, when Caribbeans came over to England to help after the First World War. So,
yes, right.
You know, they came over for the 40s and 50s and 60s. They came. Yeah. And, you know, that colonialism, they brainwashed Caribbeans, Jamaicans, and didn't even know that they were descended from Africans.
Right.
I went to school with kids who had no idea. No, man, I'm Jamaican. We're talking about. My mom and dad are Jamaican. And I'd be like, you weren't in, your ancestors were brought to you. They did not know.
Wow.
Until Roots came out. They didn't know because they were deliberately kept uneducated.
Yes.
So because of that, there was a chasm between Africans born in Africa and Caribbeans, because Caribbeans looked at Africans and were like, ugh, they think they're better than us, and they come from the jungle and all this, because all they knew about Africans was what was in the Tarzan movies.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then Africans look down on Caribbeans again. They look at them, they don't even know their own history, they're useless. So there was that. So my mum wouldn't let me go anywhere, and she did not like it when I had Caribbean, Jamaican. Just Jamaicans, don't mix with them. You know, my mum would rather I had white friends than Jamaican friends. That's how bad it was.
Interesting, right? So she's saying here that most Caribbean people were actually very ignorant because they thought that all we had ever watched was the whole matter of Tarzan, the Tarzan movies, which suggested that Africa was backward and the Caribbean, anything that was outside of Africa was forward. Now, is that true? Or is that just typical of the Windrush generation? Now, it is likely that most of the Caribbean people who went on the Windrush during Windrush would have been less literate about Africa and Africa's role in civilization, because back then you would have gotten a colonial education, and all they would have spoken about is what Great Britain did, right, and the kings and the queens, and they would tell us about how Great Britain actually liberated us and how they stood for freedom, William Wilberforce and all of these great liberationists, right? That is what they would have told us. So I am sure that it is not atypical of the then Windrush generation to have looked down on Africans. But the same thing can be said, as she suggested, that Africans also looked down on Caribbeans because they thought that we went through slavery, and because of that, and we are descendants of slavery, they thought that we are inferior to them. The same thing happens in the US, where a lot of African citizens, those who are coming directly from Africa, look down on African Americans and also Caribbean citizens and blacks outside of Africa because they thought that we went through the vicissitudes of slavery, right? So the same things are happening in Great Britain right now as we speak between Afro-Caribbeans in terms and and Africans themselves. And we see that chasm as she's talking about, and something that we need to discuss in this afternoon's conversation. If you do make it to the live, I did tell you to come to the live at 6 o'clock so that we can get the algorithm to disperse and to get the live across to share it with as many people on the platform. All right, so let us go to another. If you don't come, then I just end the live. I'm not going to waste my time as usual. Okay, so let's move on to another video, and we are going to see what we can get from the presentation. Now, there are some people who are suggesting lots of Caribbean, this speaker here is wondering if very soon Caribbean blacks will become extinct. She's also suggesting that a lot of Caribbean blacks in the UK are intermarrying, right? So they're intermixing in terms of different ethnic groups and races, and it might be that very soon Caribbean culture might not be as predominant in the UK. But let's listen to what
we are the only ethnic group known to be declining in numbers according to the 2021 consensus. We are a declining population. Arguably, you could say it's because of factors such as the passing of the elderly Windrush generation, decreased Caribbean migration to Britain, and a lot of inter-ethnic and interracial relationships in our community. Mixed Caribbean people remain the largest mixed group in the UK. In 2021, over 513,000 people identified as mixed and Black Caribbean, which is an increase of 20% from the 2011 consensus. So this essentially means that now and in the next 10, 20 years, it's going to become increasingly more common to meet a mixed Black and white Caribbean person than a Black Caribbean person. I think as part of the younger diaspora, it's really important to ask ourselves, well, what are we doing to preserve our culture? Who are we beyond Windrush? And I'm really asking, who are we beyond Windrush? Because I think when there's conversations about Caribbean culture in the UK, we're almost treated as an archive. Like a lot of exhibitions or TV programs or articles are focused primarily on Windrush, which is very important. This is no means to say to the Windrush generation, my maternal grandparents were part of that generation. Their impact and legacy is insurmountable, and they deserve the praise. A writer on this platform called Tiana the Writer actually wrote a really good Substack talking about this, and essentially how Caribbean culture has been nativized, meaning that our culture has essentially been stripped down and used basically as an aesthetic for other people. Like, let's think about the numerous amount of creators, actors, celebrities that are not Caribbean or even Black, but have used their proximity to Caribbean culture as a way to profit. I also think it's really important to remember that most of the British Caribbean diaspora now is young. We have so much power and agency to really take control of where our community is heading in the next 10, 20, 30 years and so on. I also think it's really important to be intentional about preserving, our culture and actively making the decision to go back home to the Caribbean, whether it's your home island or another island. I actively spent a lot of my childhood in Jamaica, which is where I'm from, and consecutively for the past 3 years, I've gone back to the Caribbean. I also think it's imperative, to talk about Caribbean history, folklore, play our music, cook our food, talk our language, play mass, go to Caribbean events, really be in spaces that uplift us and where we're surrounded by our people, because it's really important. Ultimately, the future of our culture depends on us, and we need to be more intentional about preserving this.
Okay, now When the Windrush generation arrived at Tilbury from the Caribbean on June 22nd, 1948, Britain, with its new reforming Labour government, was a country short of workers. Men and women were needed to rebuild an economy weakened by the war years, especially in those sectors crucial to the reconstruction program. These included the production of raw materials such as iron, steel, and coal, as well as food. There was also a huge backlog of essential maintenance and repair work and severe shortages in the construction sector. In the service sector, both men and women workers were needed to run public transport and to staff the new National Health Service, that's the NHS. It was this prospect of employment that attracted many of the Windrush passengers to leave the Caribbean. However, the initial reaction to Windrush was not welcoming. In the immediate post-war years, the government had recruited white Europeans displaced during the war to fill labor vacancies rather than looking to the empire. And while some press headlines welcomed the Windrush passengers, the government was alarmed by the prospect of a visibly different population, although reassured by the assumption that several hundred men and some women who disembarked would be temporary visitors rather than here to stay. So they were already telling them that they were going to be temporary visitors and not that they were there to stay. Economic necessity negated this assumption. Exacerbating the labor shortages, the total working population had fallen by 1.38 million between mid-1945 and the end of 1946. As many married women and older people who had delayed retirement left the jobs that they had filled in the war. People were also leaving the country. In the later 1940s and into the 1950s, many families emigrated to parts of what was then known as the Old Commonwealth, including Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, countries that were themselves short of labor and anxious to encourage white settlers from the United Kingdom in an effort to maintain their old colonial links and European notions of citizenship and identity. As these territories were recruiters rather than sources of white British workers, attention turned to citizens of new Commonwealth countries, especially in the early post-war years, residents in the Caribbean, as a potential source of new employees. The migration of colonial citizens began slowly from 1948, when the Empire Windrush arrived, until 1952. Between 1,000 and 2,000 people entered Britain each year, followed by a steady and rapid rise until 1957, when 42,000 migrants from the new Commonwealth, mainly from the Caribbean, entered. The numbers declined by almost a half in the two succeeding years, but by 1960 had increased again to 58,000, and then in 1961 more than doubled in anticipation of the 1962 Commonwealth Immigrants Act that would restrict opportunities for entry. So as time went by, they started to do what? To restrict opportunities for entry. By 1961, according to the National Population Census, the number of people living in England and Wales who were born in the Caribbean was just over 161,000 to 90,000 men and just over 71,000 women. So what did these early migrants from Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and other Caribbean countries that were then part of the British Empire do in the UK when they came to what they saw as the mother country? The most common sectors in which people from the Caribbean found jobs included, for men, manufacturing and construction, as well as public transport. Many Caribbean women found employment in the NHS as nurses and nursing aides, as well as in public transport and in manufacturing, especially in the growing white goods industries in cities. People in the main, young, left the Caribbean for a range of reasons, attracted by job vacancies in the UK, but also seeking new opportunities for a different life. Some left to escape societal oppression, to evade familial restrictions, or escape poverty. Others found the decision to leave harder than they had imagined, as far as for many, it involved leaving close family and friends behind. These men and women, some of whom had fought or worked for the UK during the war and were initially leaving the Caribbean independently rather than being actively recruited, felt that they were coming home to join an imperial family to which they assumed they belonged. Instead, they came to a country that, despite changes and improving living conditions, was marked by structural inequalities and discriminatory attitudes and behavior. Although they were British citizens, official papers discussing early Caribbean migration labeled potential recruits as colored colonial labor and often stereotyped them as inferior to British workers. So the 1953 report of the Working Party on Colored People seeking employment in the United Kingdom alleged, for example, that African Caribbean immigrants or in-migrants found work difficult to obtain because of their low output, high rate of turnover, irresponsibility, quarrelsomeness, and lack of discipline. So already they were telling us that we were too quarrelsome, that Caribbean people were too argumentative, too combative. Why do you think our people were combative? Because perhaps they were treated poorly and they were actually, defending their rights, and the British people didn't like that. Where are these feisty Black people coming from, and who are they to challenge the system? These are some of the questions I'm sure that they would be posing. In fact, almost half of all the men who came from the Caribbean to the UK throughout the 1950s had previously worked in skilled positions or possessed excellent employment credentials. However, many found their access restricted to jobs the local population considered undesirable, including street cleaning and general laboring, or to jobs that demanded antisocial hours, such as working night shifts. Over half the men from the Caribbean initially accepted jobs with a lower status than their skills and experience qualified them for. And I'm sure many people who live in the United States, immigrants in the United States, can attest to that also, that they do accept jobs sometimes that is below their standard, right? Because, many of them are coming from the Caribbean region and they are pretty much, trained and very highly skilled, very well educated. But when you go into these racist societies, sometimes you have to, a lot of times, lower your standards. And that's exactly what seemed to have happened to the Windrush generation. Now, we are looking at capturing the nature of employment as the economy grew over the 1950s. Peter Fryer suggested that willing Black hands drove tube trains, collected bus fares, emptied hospital patients' bedpans. But how willing were they, right? Or how willing were these newly recruited workers, and how were they treated? Their opportunities for promotion and access to better paid jobs with greater responsibilities and prospects were often limited by discriminatory attitudes. So we're seeing, therefore, that this was not a very positive experience when they went there first. Because, again, because of their race, the fact that people there believed that they were actually, inferior to them, right? And this is what we're seeing even now being played out in the United States of America. Let's look at some other videos before we end the live. We're going to, since you're not interested, let me just finish my what I've had here on my screen, and we can end the live. Now, let's look at Black people leaving England. Or maybe I look at another where we have Black Caribbean UK culture. We have Black Caribbeans arriving in the UK. I think, did I show you this one here? Let me show if I can put that on the screen. Black Caribbeans arriving in the UK. So let's look at this. I think she gives a very good synopsis.
Paint a picture of an expat who came from Jamaica, an expat named Jeff. And when he landed, he had his hat. He was pressed and dressed, as they like to say. His clothes were very smartly pressed. And he had his grip, which to everybody else is a suitcase. He walked with his grip. And when he landed, he was shocked by the smog that confronted him. the fact that all of these houses were so close together that he thought they were factories, that there were no front gardens or back gardens, which was very different from the green grass of home. And this was his motherland. And as he passed the houses and the places that said no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, he made his way to a shared house in East London where it was owned by a Jewish family who were great allies of the Windrush generation. That expat was my father. And his first job, which he got almost immediately, was working for Matchbox, making little toy cars. They no longer exist. I'm sure there might still be some in the loft that might be worth some money right now. And then when that closed, he then worked for London Underground. And all that time, he also worked as a gigging musician. And he used to tell me about the stories of him singing in the pubs where black people were not even welcomed or were scared to go. And I feel that when my dad came to this country, he contributed greatly, not only in the work that he did, but in breaking down societal barriers, so many barriers. And once he made enough money, he rented a room and sent for my mother. And my mother came to this country and was surprised at a number of things. That food was cooked without any seasoning, that English people only bathed once a week and went to bathhouses, and that children didn't have school clothes, playing out clothes and church clothes, because that was an absolute must in the Jamaican household. And the contribution of the Windrush generation is vast and varied. They were proud not only in how they dressed, but they were proud in how they were as a community, and they were proud of their motherland, as they called it. And they did not know the Jamaican national anthem because they came before Jamaica became independent. They only knew the British national anthem. So can you imagine this generation of people who came to this country to rebuild this country with such pride in not only how they looked, but how they conducted themselves. After giving this country the best years of their lives, they've been told that they need to go back, or they are illegal, or they're no longer wanted. It's quite heartbreaking. And when you hear the stories of people and the people that come into my surgery in tears, clutching as much bits of paper that they can find, or children of the Windrush generation, and is there anything that I can do? Will the government accept my evidence to prove that these people were here as British citizens? It's heartbreaking.
Okay, so that's an interesting sort of analysis, summary of the cultural shock by many Afro-Caribbeans as they journeyed to Britain during the Windrush generation, something that we need to look back on and something that we need to connect the dots to what is happening now. Because culturally, they were distinct and they were going to a country that they thought was the motherland, right? When they went there, they realized that they were saying no blacks, no dogs, and no Irish, right? So it means, therefore, that they were not welcomed in a state, in a country that they've always thought, right? That they were taught, actually, that was the motherland. Now, let's look at some other clippings that would help to educate us. Welcome to the live. Those of you who are coming, we're looking at who contributed more to Britain, Afro-Caribbeans or Africans, right? Something that it's now a lot of debate being generated on around that particular topic, and we would like to, voice our own opinions. Now, look at this thing I would like to show you here, because many people are suggesting that Africans are doing far better than Caribbean blacks in the UK.
2011 census, African households were more likely to be married. 26% of black African households were a married couple versus 17% of Caribbean households. And when you look at married couples actually raising kids, married with dependent children is 20% for Africans versus 9.6% for Caribbeans. So an African kid is more than twice as likely to be growing up with two married parents in the house. Flip it the other way, Caribbean households are the most likely in the entire country to be a single person living alone. And on the latest census, over half of Caribbean families with kids, 51%, are headed by a lone parent. Highest of any ethnic group in Britain, full stop. Kid having two committed parents in the house, pulling two incomes, splitting the school runs and the homework and the discipline is the same as one tired parent doing it all alone. It's not the same. Single mums are out here doing it alone and they're carrying the whole world on their back. And I'm not blaming them. In fact, I'm in awe of a lot of them. But we have to be honest. We have to be honest about the maths here.
Right. Now, this is something that we have to talk about, because the same conversation is being had surrounding our Black Caribbeans and Black Africans doing better than African Americans in the United States. And what has happened, there seems to be a link, a direct link or an analogy. We can look at what is happening in Great Britain with Caribbean Blacks who have been there since, 1948 and beyond. And they are not as aggressive in terms of education, acquiring an education as, the Africans, their African counterparts. The same thing is happening in the US, where we see recently arrived immigrants from the Caribbean and from Africa are disproportionately doing better, right, than their African American counterparts. Why is that so? Is it because Black Caribbeans and their descendants are too comfortable in Great Britain that they've decided now that they are just a part of that culture and they don't need to educate themselves? They don't need to have good family life, as he's suggesting here, that most African homes in Great Britain, in the UK, there is normally a mother and a father that they're married, while most Caribbean, children are living in single parent homes. Now, how is that going to affect them, right, and their future? Are they going to lead healthy families? These are some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves. And how will Africa, the Africans, continue to outperform Caribbeans in the UK? These are some questions that we need to ask. Now, Randy is saying that if these colonizers didn't pillage and steal from the Caribbean or Africa, the issue of migration wouldn't be a thing. When most people migrate, it's because of opportunity, education, or resources. Well, migration has always been a thing, but not to the extent as you're suggesting. Had they not pillaged and plunder, perhaps you would not have the extent, right? But migration has always been a thing throughout human existence. Now we have Randy Singh basically trying to regain what was stolen from them, right? Okay, and that is really true. That what Caribbeans went there to do, but they were not even trying to get back to. They were just trying to say, okay, that Great Britain needed some workers, because that's what Great Britain did. They went to the Caribbean in the 1940s and told them that they had jobs there for them, waiting for them, and the people applied. That's what people do. If you come to my country and tell me that you want teachers and lawyers and engineers, then of course they are going to go. They're going to get up and go if they think that they want to live in that country and they want the job. And that's what they did, right? So Caribbean people did not go there because they thought that they wanted to leave their country. What is because of that? Well, that too, but the fact is that they were invited, okay? Now, Trevor is saying it's undeniable what the Windrush generation did, and many upward to this day are still benefiting from that single action. No matter what they built, though, there is still an unspoken class divide, right? And then there's racial divide, because we're saying too, the division is not only between whites and blacks in Britain, but between Africans and Afro-Caribbeans, That's what we're looking at today, particularly that there is, right, a sort of disconnect. And if you understand, people are suggesting that Africans are doing much better than Caribbeans in terms of education and economics. Okay, so why have we fallen behind? Are we actually now following white people? Because sometimes we do talk against white people, but a lot of what they do and the trends they set, we follow them, including African Americans. So oftentimes we talk about racism, but everything that whites do, we copy them. And because we copy them, then we end up making the same mistakes that they make. The only difference is that they don't suffer as much as we do. And that is what we have to understand. So if they begin to become, atheistic, we also become atheistic. Everything we learn from them, and we think that they are the symbols of progress when they are not, because they have, as you say, white privilege. Pedro is saying, it seems going independence was the problem. Well, the fact is that they went there before independence. The Windrush generation, remember, went to Great Britain in 1947, was it, or 48? So they would have done so before independence, and that lots of them went there right before we actually got our independence in the 1960s. Now, Trevor is saying, yes, the Africans are about their business and they keep to their community. It's a cultural mindset. They're not perfect, but there is definitely a lack of structure from the Caribbean households. And how did we learn that? Because we went there, for the most part, it seems, with some form of structure. And then it seems as if somehow, eventually, we strayed from that structure as we moved away from our culture, and then we find ourselves in the predicament that we now find ourselves in. How is it that Caribbean people are not moving in the direction of education, and that many of us are no longer interested and only Africans are? We have to ask ourselves that question, because the Caribbean region has always been known for people who actually put a high premium value on education. So why is it the descendants of the Windrush generation are not valuing education as they should be valuing it as a tradition of Caribbean heritage and culture? Now, Pedro is saying maybe the Africans were glad to get away from Africa, while the Caribbean nationals were disturbed about two motherlands, and perhaps that is one, yeah. But I think what is happening, and it's the same thing that is happening also in the United States, is that the African Americans have become so adjusted to living the life that they live in the United States that sometimes they don't understand the pain and the suffering that other Black people go through in the third world, right, in Africa and also in the Caribbean. So the recently arrived Africans and Caribbeans to the United States, they are more hungry for success than African Americans who have always lived there, right? And that has been their homeland for many centuries, right? However, the same thing is also happening in Great Britain, where the descendants of the Windrush generation think that they're so linked. They're more British now. They are British. They're no longer Jamaican and Barbadian and Trinidadian. They are now Black British, and so they are going to behave as if they're superior when they're not. And that this is their homeland. They're settled. They've become settled in a place that they think is their homeland. Okay, and that is so you'll find when you go to America that you don't see African Americans. For the most part, you have some who do, but for the most part, they are not as hungry for success. And that's what happened to the Africans when they went to Great Britain in the 1980s. They went there hungry for success. Right? And it seems to me that the racial temperature in Great Britain had slightly changed too, right? Because had they gone there in the 1940s, in the mass wave that they did in the 1980s, things might have been different for them. Okay, so that could be a justification too. Everybody's hailing, so let's get to the when temporary and then independence came. Right. Well, the fact is that they thought that they were going to be permanent. Remember now, when they went to Great Britain, they were given permanent, legal status. So they could work and stay in the country. It was when they now began to go en masse and the locals there, the British people didn't like that, then the government began to change the immigration policies. But when they went there in 1947, 1948, they went there on legal status, and that they could have been permanent there. Remember that they were subjects of Great Britain. We were not yet free and independent countries, so they were considered to be subjects of Great Britain. They didn't need a passport. All they needed was some whatever, permission that they could stay there, live there, and work. But did you know that in 2010, the Home Office in Great Britain destroyed all of those paperwork? So do you see what is happening? That they can destroy your legality, the legal papers that you signed. And they destroyed that. And then they said that these descendants of the Windrush generation were not legally there, and they have to reapply for permanency in Great Britain. How evil of them to have done that. So when we say that this is Trump and Trump and Trump, that happened in Great Britain in 2016. And the paperwork were destroyed in 2010. So it's for us to understand that these people, whether it's Great Britain or it is the United States, whether it's Donald Trump or Tony Blair, they're the same, okay? Annie is saying, I think the latest arrivals to any country tend to do better than those who were there before them. Correct. I agree 100% with Annie. Why? Because they're hungry, and that they, because the whole matter is that they've not been, settled into the country yet. And they think that, here are opportunities, and perhaps now the descendants of these Windrush generation people, the Black British of Caribbean descent, think that they, why are we killing ourselves? This is our home country. Why the rush? Why the hurry? It's just the same thing. Let us say, it's amazing how people behave. When you look at the DR, for example, and you like to say, you like to talk about the DR, but I have to say this. When you see Haitians here and how they see opportunities and they make opportunities, and Dominicans don't see, they don't think that there are opportunities, and they cry. And there are no jobs, and they're not as hungry and aggressive as Haitians are for what? For success. And that is what you're saying, Annie, that those who come afterwards tend to see more opportunities, and they understand what they've left behind, and they're hungry for success. We Caribbean, those of us who are descendants of the Windrush generation, don't feel as hungry as Africans do. But it's sad. What happened? Because Caribbean people normally are hungry for success. Now, Trevor is saying another difference is Africans were not as influenced as us when it comes to mimicking the slack African-American version of Black culture. In recent times, though, Africans are also slipping. Yeah, and they might slip. And one of the things too, Trevor, is that we were told, we were indoctrinated in the Caribbean that we are British subjects, right? Subjects of Great Britain. So we thought ourselves to be much more aligned with British culture and civilization. We thought we were Western, right? Because, some people are denying what Gina said. Let me replay what she said, because some of you weren't on the live. So let me replay what Gina said. Let me see if I can find it and replay what she says, because she said some truth. It's harsh, and some of what she said was exaggerated, I must say. But to some extent, it is true that we think we are British, right? Or back then we thought we were British, only to know that we are not. So let me play this, just replay it, because I played it already. You came late, some of you. We have to rehash this here.
Caribbeans are strong.
This is Windrush, right?
God.
Windrush came what is the Windrush? The 1930s?
Yeah, when Caribbeans came over to England to help after the First World War. So,
yes, right.
They came over the 40s and 50s and 60s. They came.
Yeah.
And, that colonialism, they brainwashed Caribbeans, Jamaicans, and didn't even know that they were descended from Africans.
Right.
I went to school with kids who had no idea. No, man, I'm Jamaican. We're talking about. My mom and dad are Jamaican. And I'd be like, your ancestors were brought to they didn't know until Roots came out.
Right.
They didn't
So
know.
that is true to an extent. Those of us who were born before the 1970s of the Black Power movement, we never remember. Now it was actually the guy, the intellectual from Guyana. What's his name again? The one that wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. What's his name? What, I forgot his name. Yeah, but it was him actually, right, who went to places like Jamaica and to other parts of the Caribbean, including his own home country, Guyana. Walter Rodney, right? Walter Rodney, who actually taught many Jamaicans that they were from Africa. All right. Many people say that because, Marcus Garvey was from Jamaica, Jamaicans knew. That was not true, right? A few of them knew and they would have followed Marcus Garvey. But remember now that the majority of Jamaicans did not like Marcus Garvey, including Black Jamaicans, because they heard him with that sort of African sort of, narrative, and they didn't think that they were Africans. Many of us, including in my generation, Generation X, did not believe we were Africans too. Many of us learned that when we went to countries like the United States and we went to Great Britain, where we saw the racial problems there that we never, saw in our home countries, and we had to adapt, right? And in order to adapt, we had to learn the history of how this thing came about, and then we became more sensitized. I remember when I went to a conference at Howard University in 2003, and there was this Jamaican poet, and he was saying, well, we are Africans. And I'm like, we're Africans? I don't know we are Africans, right? Because we're Jamaicans, or we're Trinidadians, or we're Barbadians. So, I think it's in recent times that many Caribbean people have now begun to accept and to embrace that we are of, for the most part, because not all of us are of African descent. And that's what I need to understand. I need to also say that when we say Afro-Caribbeans, we need to understand that not all of us are Afro. Right, you had lots of Trinidadians who were Indian who went to Great Britain. So we can't also put everybody in one box, and that's what when people talk about the racializing arguments, we tend to just put things black and white, and it's not that simplistic. The argument is more nuanced, but it is true that many of our people never associated ourselves with Africa because we thought Africa was an undeveloped place, and that is why people like the Guyanese scholar Walter Rodney could not have returned back to Jamaica, because according to them, the authorities, he was creating too much division, because what Jamaicans understood of themselves were that they were Western and that Britain was the motherland. Okay, so we have listened to the British Parliament and the United States Congress full of Negroes today, right? And they're more token Negroes. I don't think they're full. They're not full too, right? Let's make that clear to Jamal. They're not full, but they are token Negroes that they select so that they can fool us that they are for equality. Okay, so when you look at Great Britain, very few Black MPs you have there, very few, right? And in the United States Congress, you have more definitely, but not as many as you could have had the country been less racist. Trevor is saying it's easier to brainwash a smaller demographic, as seen even now in the Caribbean, and the new Black culture pushes being illiterate and bombastic or ungodly with money. Correct. The culture is transitioning into a new one. And this culture that we have is one which embraces more entertainment, badmanism, and the gun culture, as Annie was saying, the gun culture. So when we're saying that you have Black Trinidadians and Black Jamaicans killing off each other and embracing the gun culture than education, it is true. But what we need to understand, we can't just say, oh, that's racism. No. Why is it happening? Yes, a part of it is racism, but we also have to take what? Responsibility. And we have to be accountable for why our Black males are now not interested in education and becoming civilized people. Now, Trevor is saying Africans are trying their best to get as far as away as possible from their home. For example, using Barbados or other Caribbean countries as a stepping stone into Europe and the US. That might be true to an extent too, Trevor, but I'm hearing that many of them in Great Britain are actually leaving to go back home, building big mansions to go back home. So many of them never went there to stay. They actually went there to be educated. And as they educate themselves, like many Caribbean people in the United States, they find themselves with good jobs. You know, they get good jobs and they stay, they work a decent salary, and then they end up, you know, building their big homes in Nigeria or Ghana, wherever they're from, and they do return. They do return. In fact, there was a thing now that some Black people, Black Brits, are going back to their respective countries. I think I should find that video to show you what is happening there right as we speak. Just like we have in the United States, to where Black people are returning to their countries of origin because they believe that, you know, those countries are not giving them what they, you know, it's too racist and they're not very happy there. So here we have Black people leaving Great Britain, because of the struggles. Let's get it on the screen.
Slowly starting to happen in the UK, and a lot of people who are living here aren't even realizing it. There's a huge movement which is called Blaxit, where loads of Black people are starting to leave the UK to go to places such as Africa and the Caribbean. This is due to the racism which is currently happening in this country rising, and the so-called microaggressions. And also how big parties like Reform and stuff are gaining more popularity, and people just think that this country is becoming more hostile to us as Black people. We are also seeing the rise of the cost of living crisis. And when I tell you this cost of living crisis is just getting ridiculous, I went to McDonald's the other day to get apple pie. Now, when I was younger, like a few years ago, apple pie was 99p, guys. When I went into McDonald's, the apple pie was £2.88. £2.88 for an apple pie. That is absolutely ridiculous. And even when I go shopping by myself, I might go Waitrose, M&S. I like going to those kind of shops, I can't lie. So when I go there normally, I've seen the prices are just rising even more. And even if I go to places like Lidl, the prices are climbing up. And I think a lot of people have just had enough of it, and they're just like, yeah, me just live somewhere else. And also, there's not a big sense of community in this country, where I feel like if you go to places such as Barbados, Guyana, Ghana, you're going to get a bigger sense of community, where I also feel like it's better to raise children. So I feel like within my generation, a lot of people will eventually leave this country and live in other places. And also, people love going to places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but that's not really going to be happening now because of the war which is happening within the region. But it really goes to show how things are really changing, and this country is not the country where it was 50 years ago. Let me tell you lot that for a fact. And even the older generation are leaving because they've worked here.
All right, so we can see that, you know, Black people are moving, right? They're moving, they're going back to their home country. They're seeing that the cost of living is rising in Great Britain. They're seeing where the retirement will take them better, will do them better, right? They will live a higher quality life if they go to the Caribbean or back to Africa. So many of them are not willing to stay there. They just are en route, right? And they're used in Great Britain to get jobs, better jobs, and then to return to their country. Now, Pedro is saying the European Union is helping CARICOM with culture, and the same CARICOM is begging for reparations. Make it make sense. Remember now that when we say reparations, it's not for us. So CARICOM and the European Union are really working together for that, because they know that it is not for what we think reparations should be for. It's for climate change, right? It is for the climate agenda. Now, we have Anguilla and Montserrat are British. Yes, they are British. They're still British colonies, right? But it doesn't mean that anything at all. Now, Trevor say, I remember seeing a Nigerian lady interviewed in Barbados and was asked by another African, what are the similarities? She said, the color, nothing else. The children don't respect their elders, etc. Wow. So it means that they too are beginning to adopt, yes, British culture. Now, those who were there before, Annie's saying, would have made it quite easier for the new arrivals. Very good point, Annie. And that is what we have to understand, that when Africans are saying that they're doing better than Caribbean people, they must understand that the struggles started with Caribbean people. And they were the ones who transformed British society, fought against racism, and laid the foundation for many Africans. And to some extent, that is what African Americans say to us too, as Caribbeans and Black people from Africa, that they too, for the most part, because we were also involved in the struggles from a long time, but for the most part, African Americans, they were the ones who labored and fought against lots of the injustices in America and laid the foundation for Caribbean and African people to go to America and succeed. Right? So that is the same thing that happened, and you're correct. The older heads would always have it harder. Absolutely. We laid the foundation, and that cannot be denied. Yes, Walter Rodney, he was the one who definitely spoke about, that we were from Africa. And in fact, he taught many of the Rastafarians, right? People like even the likes of Bob Marley. These people, they had a lot of respect for Walter Rodney, because Walter Rodney was not the typical intellectual. He would go out into the streets. In the Caribbean, our intellectuals are very standoffish, right? And they don't talk to ordinary people. They don't even walk on the streets, right? They drive in their cars and they feel very important. But Walter Rodney was the one who, just like Eric Williams, they would go out into the streets and they would interact with the public. And these were very bright intellectuals. Dr. Eric Williams was probably one of the brightest the Caribbean has ever seen, right? And the Walter Rodneys. Yet still they interacted with the people and had their street universities and educated the masses. And that was too much a sort of disruption for the Jamaican order, because what are you talking about? That Africa, we're Africans? No, we're British, right? We're Westerners. Now, Pedro is saying, you think they can just fly Africa and be an African? You think they can just fly Africa? What do you mean by that? Could you explain for me, Pedro? Now we have Trevor saying, you can get any more snobbish than many of the same Africans when they arrive. They look down on everyone else, particularly Nigeria. Yes, and that's what she wasn't saying, Gina. So I was saying, while she was speaking some truth and she added some value to the conversation, but she was also biased as an African, as a person who is, well, I think he's African or African descent, because she should understand that Africans do look down on all of us who are descendants of slaves outside of Africa. They do the same thing in the United States. They look down on Caribbean people and they look down on African Americans. And that's why African Americans sometimes reject them. So they do have that sort of air and aura about them that sometimes you have to check. And sometimes they believe that we have to all be like them. No, even though, I say to people, I am of Caribbean extract and you belong to this country. You can say I am of African descent, but it doesn't mean I'm African in terms of the practices and the cultural norms of Africa, right? So I'm not going to eat with my hand. And some of them would say, come and eat with us, Andrew, and they're putting their hands in the food. I am not going to eat like that. And I'm not saying my culture is better. It's not. It's just that that's not my cultural practice and norm, right? I would take a spoon or a fork or whatever to eat the food and not to be eating it with the hands. Nothing is wrong with that. And we sometimes conflate these two things, that if I don't do what Africans do, it means therefore that I'm not African. If I don't practice voodoo and I'm not a part of juju and all of what they practice, I'm not African. That is stupidness, right? And we need to let go of that. We must be proud of the fact that we are of African descent, right? And there are norms, there are things, practices that we still have in terms of our swag, in terms of our speech, and not even the food that we eat, right? That it has been highly influenced by African culture, the music. So we can't deny these things, but to suggest that we are fully 100% African, just like Africa is a continent, right? The Ghanaian and the Nigerians are not the same, right? They are from the continent, but they have different cultures. And we've got to, just like we're all from the Caribbean and we have different cultures, and it does mean, therefore, that you have to subsume yourself under the banner of a Barbadian culture or Trinidadian culture if you are different, if you're coming from a different culture, nation state. Okay. Now, Trevor is saying, don't doctor, lawyer, bank, manager, or white man's wife, and most of them jump for the last option. The fact is that we Caribbean people do that in America too, right? We want to be associated with the white man and that we are working on Wall Street because that is to us a symbol of, of success, progress, to work on Wall Street, to go to Harvard and all. So I think that's exactly what the Africans do in Great Britain. And why not? Why not? If they can succeed, why not? The problem is I don't like the conflict between both groups because we need to unite, and I think that we are actually quarreling over very small, fish. I think we need to concentrate on, this demolishing the whole matter of racism and the racial barriers that are there in the UK. But we also have to talk about the fact that Caribbean people were not happy when you had this huge migration of Africans to the UK in the 1980s. We were not comfortable with it. Just like the African Americans are not comfortable in seeing many Black migrants coming to America because they feel that we are coming to take away their opportunities. So that's what Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean people of British, and let me just stop saying Afro-Caribbean, British people of Caribbean descent, because some of us are not Africans, right? British people of African descent, of Caribbean descent rather, some of us were actually, jealous, and we were upset that you had this huge wave of African migrants to compete with the limited opportunities that we had there in Great Britain. Trevor is saying, so sad what is happening in Africa through though super corrupt, especially in places like Nigeria and Kenya, but idolizing color places a gag order on those of similar shade. Correct. Agree with 100% with what you're saying. And Pedro is saying, what is full Negro? Skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? Hope you know that, correct. And that's why I'm saying that I don't believe in this just 100% that people are Black, because particularly those of us in the Caribbean, we have different shades. Sorry about that. I turned off my light. We have different shades of and different ethnic groups that we are mixed, right? We're mixed. And I agree with what you're saying here, Pedro. Now, so no education is home. You make it sound like those countries are a shithole for true. Now, what do you mean by that? No, what I'm suggesting here is that we are not actually achieving much in education, and we're talking about the descendants. Now, I'm not talking about the recently arrived Caribbeans too, because there are those of us who have gone there after the Windrush generation, maybe in the 1990s, 2000. We are different, right? Because we're coming from the Caribbean, where we have had that tradition of excellence, and nobody's telling us that our skin color is inferior. Okay, that is different. So you have lots of Barbadians, and in fact, Dr. Orlando Patterson wrote a very good piece on Barbadians and the fact that Barbadians, for a very long time in history, long before Jamaica and Trinidad, had very educated Black people. Right? The British educated them. And many of the people who went during the Windrush generation were some very educated Black people from Barbados. And they were superior and much more educated than their British white counterparts. Right? So go and read Dr. Orlando Patterson's work. And he's from Harvard. And he will show you how the Barbadians who went there during the Windrush generation were not just skilled people, but they were highly educated people from the civil servant office there in Barbados, right? They were civil servants. So that is something we need to understand. Who's worthy to sit at the master's table, right? That is the question, that we love to sit at the master's table. The closer we are, the more superior we feel. And then Trevor says, yes, the older, more eloquent presentation of a Black man and importance of education is still alive in Africa, but with things changing and the exposure to Western culture, how much longer? Yes, and another important point, I agree with you 100%, Trevor. And another important point here, is education really, when I say education, I don't mean reading and exposing yourself to knowledge, because that's something different from education from a school going through to university and whatever. Is that benefiting us still? Because many people are leaving schools, as we're seeing Trinidad, okay, that we read this article where many educated Trinidadians are not able to find jobs. And that is throughout the world right now, including the United States, where people are saying the education system is not preparing them for getting jobs, and they come out indebted. So should we really privilege education over entrepreneurship? And so sometimes when they're saying that the Africans are doing better in the UK educationally, I say, well, perhaps that is true. They're going to school, so they have their school leaving certificates. But what about the Caribbean people and their entrepreneurship? They have their barbershops, they have their restaurants, they have their this and their music albums, whatever. I'm sure Africans, some probably have theirs too. But the fact of the matter is that what do we value as success? people coming out and leaving schools and they can't find a job and they're more impoverished because they owe this huge debt. These are conversations we must have too. What do we define as success? You know, these are things we need to have. These are our conversations that we need to have. It doesn't mean anything maybe to you, but it showed the islands that remains a colony are British citizens. Yeah, but what I'm saying, it doesn't mean they're not independent. And that's what I meant. Not what I'm saying that it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm saying, what does it mean to them to be British citizens when they're not independent? And the British people don't see them as their equals, right? I'm not saying now that, you know, I don't care. You know, I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. Now, Pedro is saying, because you are not an African, you have genetics, maybe Caucasian too. Well, the fact of the matter is that we all have genetics coming from everywhere, because the Caribbean people, as Caribbean peoples, you know, people of different ethnic groups that have lived here and interacted, I think that, yeah, if we were to do a DNA test, we would find ourselves having different, you know, DNA in our genetics. So you're right, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Pedro. We have correct of African descent is good enough, right? That is what we are. We are of African descent. We're not Africans, just like we can say that we are of Caribbean descent, but you might not be Trinidadian or, you know, or from St. Lucian, right? It doesn't mean therefore that you hate your Trinidadian or you hate your St. Lucian, but you're saying that I'm not from there. So, but I'm Caribbean, and there are some similarities that we have as Caribbean citizens, but there are lots of differences too. Culturally, culture separates us, and demographics also help to impact how the culture is shaped, right? So we have to understand all these things, and nothing is wrong with that. Nothing is wrong with that. If somebody says, don't mix Trinidad with Jamaica because I'm Trinidadian, nothing is wrong with that. That is where you're from, and you should be very proud of that. It doesn't mean that you're racist. Pedro Jamati is saying racism excess. Sorry, I missed your thing. Racism excess when you see it. Yeah, you're right. Now, Pedro, listen, Black people were in Parliament before adult suffrage started that. Yeah, but I'm not saying that Black people have not, as we suggested in the introduction, that Black people have always been a part of British mainstream society from the Roman times. What we're saying is that it's still not as not many of us are sitting in high positions of power. That's what we're saying. We're not saying that there have always been, as you're saying, Pedro Jamat, Black people in Parliament and in high, social positions, economic positions in Great Britain, and perhaps in the United States as well. Now, Trevor is saying no education when it was first marketed to us had a clear trial period for the average Joe to sit at the table and enter lodges to be controlled, and others became rebels like past Caribbean leaders. Yes, but we have to discuss whether or not education as we know it, traditional education, is helping us to improve our lives economically and to empower us and to become better. Because I think many of us are getting poorer by going through, and not only poorer too, we lack ideas of becoming creative entrepreneurs. Right? We don't. I look at people who have less education than I do in the Caribbean, and the creativity that they have is second to none. The creativity in terms of formulating business and other things is second to none. So does the education system really suppress our creativity? That's the question that we need to ask. And is that what is happening, what we're seeing like in Black America and also in Black Caribbean people there, in the lives of Black Caribbean people in Great Britain? These are things, or people of Caribbean descent, as I said. Now, that time has passed now. Education has watered down far more than more to have you become a factory worker just doing the bare minimum and little support if you happen to be the exceptional one, right? And there are fewer opportunities in Great Britain. Right? When we look at Great Britain, how many opportunities? What are the opportunities if you have a certain degree? Very limited, right? Very limited. And for that reason, many of them perhaps are not going down that route. Let's look at another video clipping and to stimulate our conversation, since we are looking at this important conversation, who contributed more to Britain, Afro-Caribbeans or people of Caribbean descent, better said, British of Caribbean descent, or Africans. I don't like the Afro-Caribbean thing at all, because not all Caribbean people are of African descent, and we have to respect that. Now, let's look at the another African culture. I think I did give you the brief history. The African household more likely to get married. I showed you that already. African culture shock in Britain. I think I did that too. What did I not show you that I had here on my screen? Let us look at another time the brief history of the Windrush generation. Maybe this I did not put up on the screen, and have you, yeah, this one I did not show you. So we can look at that.
Windrush generation. I think it's something that doesn't get enough attention, that needs attention as well, right? So the Windrush generation is a generation of people who entered Britain from various Commonwealth nations after World War II to help to build Great Britain after World War II, right? So these individuals came from, all, different walks of life, mainly Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, like different Commonwealth nations who entered Britain during World War II to help the British to rebuild the country, right? And in return, these individuals were promised a permanent stay or just opportunity. And, if they met certain criteria, they were also given citizenship. So what happened back in 2017 was fairly unique because, what they started to do is deport a lot of the descendants of the Windrush generation. So there's people that's being deported who's lived in Britain their entire life, right? There was one lady who got deported back to Jamaica, and she is about 90 years old now, knows nothing about Jamaica at this point, lived in Britain pretty much her entire life. Not her entire life, but, a majority of her life, let's put it that way, right? So, I think, it's just really weird. So they're saying even people who actually went through the actual channels to become legalized were also deported based on faulty record keeping, right? So how does that happen? So even if you're a citizen, based on records not being solid, they're saying that they still deported those individuals based on faulty record keeping. It's a little wild. Have any of you heard this story? And it's a little similar to like what's going on in the United States right now. But I just wanted to bring that up, and hopefully, you guys heard about it, and it's something that we're also paying attention to. Has anybody else heard about this? Drop a comment below. Let's talk a little bit. I would love to hear your opinion on the Windrush situation. And this pot was stirred back in 2017. What do you guys think? Drop a comment below.
Yeah, and this is what we have to begin to do now. I think we have to also have a conversation on who is really a citizen. And when we say that we are a citizen of a country, can they even destroy our records and say that you were not? But I guess our accent and other things will give up. I don't know. But what we do need to have now is that conversation, because if the Home Office in the United Kingdom could go and destroy all of the records of the Windrush generation and then strip them rather of their nationality, of their legal, citizenship, or I don't think they were citizens, but their legal status I should use, and strip them of their legal status, what can they not do to us? What can they not do to us? And these are the conversations. And this happened in Great Britain in 2010, 2016. And we still are talking about the same things, and we just respond to what is happening in the headline news. But we're not looking back at what happened in recent history right there in Great Britain. And it's happening right now as we speak in Trump's America. Now, Trevor saying, but again, the English language is a tricky weapon. Education, regurgitation is not education. I agree 100%. And that's what I'm saying, that we have to rethink what is education and is it really helping us as they say that it is. It's good for some people, they're in jobs and they think that that is the way how to go. But if they should lose their jobs, how do they even survive? Can you survive if you lose your job and you lose the paychecks that you're getting from from month or from getting bi-weekly? We have to ask ourselves these questions because many of us would not be able to survive. The large majority of the so-called educated people in the world now, if they don't have assets, if they should lose their jobs tomorrow, they will not be able to survive. And if we can't survive, it means that education, we have not been educated. We have not been educated. We have, as you're saying, Trevor, we just regurgitated some information, got some certificates, and they say that we're educated. I'm talking about Barbados. Oh, you're talking about the Barbadian Parliament. I got you. WHD saying that is because necessity is the mother of invention. Correct. And that is what we have to do. We have to find a way. But even outside of necessity, but you're right. I understand your the adage. But you're right. The fact that we need to learn how to create. And I think that is where we lack in education. They talk about critical thinking skills, but there's also another level, which is the creative skills that many of us lack. We just leave it at the critical thinking skills, but we also have to be creative with our ideas. And many of us are not creative, if the truth be told. WHZ saying life is harder in the Caribbean and we have to be creative to survive. This should be pinned. We have to be creative to survive. Absolutely. And I think that to some extent we're losing that creativity, WHZ, because we have been told, we have been brainwashed, as Trevor is saying, that if we just educate ourselves and go to university or to some whatever, we'll be okay. And that is not true. Trevor is saying tradesmen and women and raw talent was taught to be looked down upon. Very well said. Many parents did not pass on their knowledge to their children and they were poorly paid and the system supported this. Now it's imploding and it's going to implode even more. And many people are going to find themselves that they thought that life was okay or their job just going to work every day was the thing to do. And they're going to realize now when they lose their jobs that it is not okay that you are left without anything. Language without literature make it hard and not asking the speaker to simplify. Yes. We have here Randy saying adversity breeds creativity and indoctrination fuels complacency. Wow, it's deep. Adversity breeds creativity and indoctrination fuels complacency. And that is true. That is true. You have to be creative when life gets hard. Good evening, Simon. And then we have here Trevor saying, sign up for slavery or die. Look at many homeless people, no addiction nor laziness, just jobless and lack of resources. The US is like that, and often 3 jobs at 70 years old or die. In the Caribbean, can't get one. And that is what we have to now learn to create jobs. Right, that the Caribbean people are doing that. Hopefully they're doing that in Great Britain, and that is what they're not telling us that they're doing. And then they say that Africans are doing much better than Caribbean people. But is that true? Or is it because the Caribbean people or people of Caribbean descent have decided that they're not going to be a part of the mainstream culture of what they regard as success? Right. So therefore, there are people who will say to people who are online, those of us who have our YouTube channels, or you might have your TikTok or whatever you have, and they'll say to you, go and find a job. And I say, what are you talking about? Doing YouTube and content creation is a job. Right? It is a job. But many people don't think that it's a job. They think that going to Wall Street or going to be a teacher and working for somebody, it means therefore that is the only job. So I've seen many comments of, go and get a job. So what is the job? What do you consider to be a job? Working for, a school, right? Or working for a hospital? Is that what you think a job is? And these are some of the things that we need to get our self. We need to be aware of these things and begin to have these critical discourse, right? Because what we call job is really slavery. Speaking of which, English literature is an option in schools now added to lack of critical thinking and comprehension. Many people don't opt for it, but even the literature that we study in schools tend to be limiting also. And how many of us grew up and studied about the Windrush generation? And look at the number of people who just pass this live, because it doesn't mean anything to them. Windrush, what's that? I don't care. Right? If it's not a headline about some, corruption charges in the Caribbean, people are not interested because they don't see how history interlocks and is interconnected with what is happening right now. Unfortunately, Randy is saying trauma breeds delusion and difficulty to reprogram their brain for correction. And I think that, as you're saying here, Randy, that many Caribbean people in the UK are traumatized. It was traumatizing what they went there and saw when you're leaving Trinidad, leaving Barbados, leaving Jamaica, and you're saying people, no dogs, no blacks, and no Irish. How would you feel? Many of them said that when they went there, even the bathrooms were black. Things were so off. The hygiene was not present, was non-existent. So for them, it was hard, and they were traumatized by what they saw. So this is nothing. So maybe they're trying to move away from that sort of, traumatic culture. That's the people of British descent, because they want to do for themselves and not depend on the British system. Now, Trevor saying Barbados is definitely one of those places, even if you are educated in the forward sense and you have some money to make an investment, the system has everything barred with red tape by politicians. And that is throughout the Caribbean. that is throughout the Caribbean, because that is how they keep alive the bureaucracy, so that they can maintain the oligarchic class. The oligarchy will maintain themselves in power, because if they should move you along, then you are going to be one day replacing the oligarchs. Remember now, the oligarchs do not want to be replaced, so they have to check. They have to restrict your movements so that they can restrict you moving up the ladder too quickly and getting to their level. Okay, so the Caribbean is controlled, just like all societies, but even more so. We still have the same system, the same plantation economy is still intact. Trevor saying Indians are surviving. One container is split among family and friends, and we have lost that, and are taught we are incapable of it, but yet the corrupted blacks make it look easy, right? Because we have adapted, not adapted, but we have adopted the white culture, what we call white culture, and that's how we are. And what is sad to me, and I have to say this, is that a lot of our Pan-Africanists, they say some of the things, but they don't believe them, right? They don't live them. Right, and that is what is sad in our Caribbean. They just talk about these rhetoric, and people use their rhetoric. Everybody's a Pan-Africanist, everybody's a doctor, everybody's and then nobody really knows how to change the system. They just talk a lot, or we all talk a lot. Randy saying enough respect to you, fam. And then we have here, they don't like opposition to even just to reason and discuss, because they were taught and teach how to follow only, right? And we only respond to things that are, headline news, and we don't look at how we can reshape our societies. These are things that we don't want to be engaged in, right? We think that, leave it to Miss Mia Motley, leave it to Andrew Holness, leave it to Dr. Irfan Ali, and they will take care of it. And we don't know that we are the ones who will have to steer our own success and move them into the direction where we want to take them in. But no, let's wait on Miss Mia Martin to do it, or Miss Cameron Person Becessor. Now, Pedro is saying, Trevor, the red tape is for protection. Absolutely. Don't ask for it to be removed. Ask the person involved to do their work efficiently. Well, the fact is that if it is red tape, it can't be done efficiently. That's the whole point. Red tape and efficiency don't go hand in hand. Marie saying, in my time, English literature was compulsory for CXC ordinary level. I did not find it helpful for critical thinking at all. It is not. And unfortunately, so it is not. And it's the way how it's done. It's the way how it was taught, right? It's not that it's not helpful. It's the way how they taught it. It was more memorization, and they let us say you're talking about a poem in class, right? And you're talking about the interpretation of the poem. I remember growing up, right? And there was a young man in my class who was really bright and brighter, smarter than many of the teachers who were, who were teaching us. And sometimes when he would give his interpretation of what the poem was saying, which was logical, and when you saw what his justification was on point, but the teachers, because they could not see, they would try to put you down and say, what are you talking about? They try to suppress your interpretation of even a poem, right? Because if they don't see it, and even when we're doing our PhDs too, if you are talking about something that your supervisor doesn't see or has never studied, they're going to suppress your idea, because you must work in their narrow mind of what they think the subject is about. And in the Caribbean, that is a big thing. And that is why I'm not for like the CCJ alone. I still say, have your Privy Council and your CCJ, but I'm not going to depend on Caribbean people for thinking, because we don't like to think. Then we have WHZ saying, I can imagine, is it Hawk, traumatized our Caribbean people when they got to the UK. They were traumatized. They were traumatized. It's unthinkable, right, what they went through, and we have to give them credit for what they did. In fact, there was a tribute somebody made to them, and maybe we could replay it. I think that's the first video I played. Let me see if it was this, and in which she made a tribute. She said that, and she expressed it well. Tribute to the people. No, it was not this one. Let me see if I could change it and remove this one. If I could get it, I'll show it. If not, but she made a very good tribute to our people who trekked all the way to England during the Windrush. Where is it now? Black people leaving England. We have culture shock of the Windrush generation. I think that was, I did that with you. If I don't find it, then we'll just move on to another item on the list. Okay, no, all right, so let's move on. Yeah, so they were Stephen is saying here that unfortunately that's how the system works. Yes, and that is how it is. And we have the Black intellectuals is who spreading the trauma, right? The Twistorians. You're correct. You're correct. And not everybody, but for the most part, they are. Good night, Maria. Good night, Maria. And then we have Pedro here. Trevor saying Pedro Twistorians, and that takes the cake. Correct. A very good expression for those who are distorting knowledge. And WHD saying they fought so hard in the UK only to have continental Africans come and undermine their progress. Unity is coming soon. And what happens too is that these white people like to also create divisions among us. Do you know that? So even when we go there as Caribbean blacks to the United States, and they create this division between African Americans and Caribbean blacks and African blacks, so that we can't come together and we can't see eye to eye. They do that. So we have to watch out. They are behind a lot of the division that we see. Maria, yes, the way it is taught is so the school could reason on what it was about. Then we have Trevor, exactly, Andrew. They teach you groupthink. That's exactly what they do. Get out my class, you're causing disturbance. And that's what they do. They don't want you to think. And if you think outside the box, you are disrupting the class. Exactly what Pedro is saying. And, I was never a bad student in terms of being a disruptor, but I was considered to be a disruptor in the questions that I used to pose in my classes. Right throughout university, this guy, why are you asking me that question? Because you want to know, you're curious at what education is all about. You're a class of the 80s, right? Of the 80s, yeah, I was there. Lots of racism and colorism exists in the UK. Trevor saying still, especially as you go up north. Yes. And to think that they were actually stripping people of their legal status in England in the modern era, in the 21st century, is something that we have to really, reflect on. because the same thing happening in the United States right now. Now, Trevor is saying, just with more diplomacy, people might prefer hearing how black and niggerish they are in British accent, like how Motley would call you an idiot with 100 words and people cheer for it. Very well said, because the British people are known for their politeness, right? But they can be crude and cold. They are cold, and I call it a cold formalism. And they speak so, they sound nice, right? But what they do, and we have seen during slavery, what they do, they can be some of the most brutal people in the world. The British culture. Don't be fooled by their courtesies and their politeness. And he's saying, as you say, Pan-Africanist, do you know it was the Trinidadian barrister Henry Sylvester Williams who coined the phrase Pan-Africanism? By the way, he was also the mentor of Marcus Garvey. Yes, yes. Very well said, and thank you for bringing that up. I'm just saying that in those times, though, Annie, people were, I would say, more genuine because they weren't working for money. They were working for the true liberation of African peoples, right? The people of African descent in the diaspora. Now, everything is all about finances and our politicians and our leaders, making money, millions of dollars from racism. Right? Look at the guy there. What's his name? Sharpton, right? Sharpton. And the fact now that this guy that went to the beach or wherever he went, to the lake with his friends, and he did not go back home. Sharpton is now making that into a big thing for him, right? Because all of this is about making money and talking about race and doing nothing. Right? Because it's all political, and it's not about real liberation, which we want. Yes, that was a great nugget from Annie. Thank you for sharing that. And then we have here, no, they are the investors of animal farm in the Caribbean. Now, one of the things, and let's go back to Annie's comment, one of the things we also need to understand, as Annie made this comment, is the fact that ideas are great, but what we need are people, who can put those ideas into practice. All right? And that is what many of us lack, including myself. If many people can come up with some great ideas, but they can't implement them. That was what Marcus Garvey did, that few people could do. Right? He was able to both, he spoke about praxis and he practiced what he preached, in other words. Many of us can't do. And that is why we have all these Pan-Africanists, and they have great ideas, but many of them cannot implement those ideas. And they don't live what they preach, because living what you preach is very hard. I don't know if you understand that. If you're a parent, you understand that. Right? That you might be telling your children, get up, do this, do that, right? But are you doing it? Are you doing it? Because it's easier said than done to say, get up early in the morning, make sure that you clean up your room, you do this, you do X. But many times parents are also guilty of not doing what they tell their children to do, because it's easier to correct and to tell children and have great ideas, but you doing it is something different, right? It's like my telling you, I don't know how to set up a YouTube channel, and I'm telling you to set up one. But guess what? It's easier said than done, because it's hard to do it and to maintain it. Trevor is saying, Sharpton is race hustler like many more. It's an industry, and it is. That's why they are so popular. Why do you think the media show them? Do you think that if he were a Marcus Garvey and C.L.R. James and these people, do you think that he would be in the media? No. He would, they would show them in the sense of trying to, denounce what they're telling the people, to undermine what they're telling the people. Yes, from that perspective, but not to be as the way he's respected and embraced by the media in the United States. They wouldn't embrace him, right, if he were genuine. Pedro is saying he never went to Africa. He went to the West, and my opinion is to make money. Oh, you think that because he didn't go to Africa is to make money? I don't think so. I don't think that Garvey was just about making money. In fact, I don't think Garvey died. Garvey died poor. Garvey died poor, and the man that whatever, if he wanted money. Remember now that if Marcus Garvey wanted money, he could have simply stopped with what he was doing. Okay? He could have just joined forces with the powers that be. And he could have become Prime Minister of Jamaica, or the United States, the powers that be in the United States would have accepted him. Right? If he was just willing to toe the line and to do what they wanted him to do. But because he did not do that, that is why they undermined him and they sent him out of the United States. By the way, Al Sharpton is also an FBI informant, right? So that says a lot. And that's what happened during Marcus Garvey's time too, that W.E. Du Bois was also, even though he was black, well, considered to be black, and great guy, great intellectual, right? But he was also an informant, and he was used primarily in getting Marcus Garvey. Because why? Marcus Garvey was having too much influence on working class black Americans. And W. Du Bois, who was, a Harvard graduate, and he, very red-skinned guy, he thought that he was superior to Marcus Garvey. And how dare Marcus Garvey come to the United States as this Caribbean person, right? And think that he can, outnumber him, outmaneuver him, and the influence that he had in the black community. So, yeah, we are sometimes our greatest enemies if we only acknowledge it. And he's saying Sylvester actually came up with the idea of the movement, and he was one of them who created it together with W.E. Du Bois. Right, but the fact of the matter is that W.E. Du Bois, as we're suggesting, great intellectual, great strategist, great theorist, but not a great mobilizer. Neither Sylvester nor W. Du Bois was able to, to mobilize, because that's what I'm saying to you, that it's one thing to come up with these ideas. But, one of the things we must understand is that people come with different talents. So maybe your talent is to write and to give me the ideas, and my talent is to do the job and to move with it. Right? And that's why we have to come together and work. The problem is that sometimes we tend to believe because you write the idea that you are superior, but you're not. Because Marcus Garvey, what he did during his time of not having internet and social media, and to have that large mass movement of black people, that he actually, without him, they would not have been mobilized in the way in which they were mobilized. And that is what W. Du Bois, he was scared and said, how did this guy, this black guy, come from the Caribbean thinking that he can mobilize people? But do you know that the Marcus Garvey movement was primarily Caribbean? It was not necessarily attended by a great deal of African Americans, and that's what we also have to understand. I see it different, yes. And then we have Booker T. Washington. Now, why would you think Marcus Garvey was running after money? Pedro, what is your evidence? What evidence is suggesting that he was an agent? Right, he was an agent, yeah. Okay. And then we have Garvey mobilized and executed the plan, right? And that is what we have to, and nothing is wrong with that. Nothing is wrong with that, and that's why we have to come together. The problem is that it's ego. As a result of ego, we think that because you created the idea, you are superior, but you're not, right? The person to execute it also has to be a highly competent person, okay? And that is what we need to do, but we tend to be in competition with each other as the Afro-Caribbeans, and the Africans in the UK are competing with each other. And we ought not to be competing in that sense, right? We ought to use all of the talents that come from the different groups and not try to think that one is superior or inferior to the other, to the next. That's what happened during W.E. Du Bois' times, and it's happening right now. It's happening right now in our community. So we will never be united. Will we ever be united? Will black people, as we call it? I mean, is there even a black community? Or is it delusional to think that? Right? Because we're not united, And not because somebody shares your complexion or your hue mean that you are thinking the same, mean that you have the same agenda, mean that you are of one. Do you know? In fact, Marcus Garvey was shocked when he went to America and saw W.E. Du Bois, and the fact that the NACCP, the black organization there in the United States, was heavily white, white Jews. He was shot. So, are we really united as a people? And I don't think things have changed much since W.E. Du Bois. I think, yes, to some extent, we have gotten some, better jobs and some token jobs, more of that. But the system has not changed. The structure of the system has not really changed. Trevor is saying, today, with all that is happening, Black people, especially those in suffering, like Haitians with the migration issue, etc., many are longing for a Messiah, but would they welcome a Marcus Garvey X today, Malcolm X today? They would not. They would not. Right? Because, again, anything that is not given white permission, right, and the imprimatur of white people is not on it, then Black people won't believe it. Remember too, as much as we hate Barack Obama or like him, remember that when he was running for the presidency, Black people said he couldn't win. Right? We know he wasn't sincere, but let us say he was sincere. Many Black people said it was Hillary and that they were going to choose, right, elect, because how dare him? After all, Bill Clinton was the first Black president in the United States, because they never thought in their wildest imagination that a Black man could ever achieve that sort of role, that position in the United States. Now, we did say that there are previous people of African descent who went to the presidency, right? And that's debatable. You can go to the video and watch that. But for whatever it is, right? Many Americans don't know that. They think that Barack Hussein Obama was the first Black U.S. president. But African Americans were not going to have it. It was when they saw, I think it's after he won North and South Carolina, right? That they started now to say, wow, so he stands a good chance. Let me vote for him. But before they weren't. So we don't like to support our own people, We don't support our own. Okay? We would rather support white people or the people selected by white people before we select our own. It's something serious that we have to talk about. We don't like to have these conversations. We like to think that somehow we are proud as Black people, right? Black power. Pedro Jabot is saying, and you saw MSM interviewing him. Right. Well, that was, we're talking here about we're not going to, highlight people's sexual orientation because that is people's private concerns. And I'm sure there are other people who are there who might have been that. But, but the fact of the matter, what we can see, like people's racial thing or whatever is obvious, right? We talk about what is obvious on these things, not necessarily what is controversial and has nothing to do with, his ability to lead anyway. Trevor is saying American Blacks are signing up to help ICE deport Haitians. You see a lot of them online and angry because Haitians are saying the money is good, but they don't like this, or that about the country, and Nigerians are pouring in now. Yes, you would be shocked the numbers of African Americans who are online saying that Haitians need to go home and build their country. Now, that is true to an extent. We all should go back and build our country. But the fact is, if the United States doesn't want that to happen, has been blocking that from happening, it's not going to happen that easily until maybe violently they do something. I don't know how it's going to be done. But as we said before, violence is what is going to be able to attack the system because the system is violent. And many Haitians, they're decent people, they don't like violence. Okay, and that is what is happening right now. But you're right, Trevor, they are actually telling them that they need to go and build, and why should America take care of Haitians? And I'm like, why should America take care of Haitians? Haitians are taking care of themselves, but America is the one that is destroying them and has stolen from the coffers of Haiti also. Stephen is saying, but America is the one who caused that country's economic downfall with sanctions, correct? And stole money away from them. And, well, I don't want to say that. And allegedly is responsible for the killing or the unaliving, I should say, of their former prime minister. What do they call it? President, right? President Jovenel Moise. Now, remember that even though Haiti was considered the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere prior to the death of President Jovenel Moise, the country was not as, unstable as it is after his death, right? And you would have thought that a significant event like that of the unaliving of the president, that we would have gotten some justice, or somebody would have gone to prison or whatever. That has not happened. The US has moved on, and they think that's how it should go. And the country has been left now with gangs that have taken over the reins of government. And by the way, and before those of you are leaving, you leave, let me say something to you. That's exactly what they're doing to our countries now. Eventually, and I read this years ago, the gangs are what will be our government. Eventually, gangs will lead us, will govern us, not the so-called uppity black people that you see in parliament right now. The gangs are going to be our new governors and leaders, and Haiti is being used as the blueprint. Hope you understand. Now, Trevor is saying, yes, if the black voice isn't greenlit by a white man, you're done. Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and more still prove that fact when compared to MLK, who is always given to you. Correct. They were friendlier with him because, before they became unfriendly with him when he started speaking out, though, right? Remember that ultimately he started speaking out. That is MLK. And when he started speaking out now, and he was going to have a big march to Washington on poverty and against the Vietnam War, they took him out. Right? So eventually MLK changed, and when he changed and was not the good guy anymore that they saw him as, working with them and was more revolutionary, they unalived him. All right, so that is what is going to happen. Yes, Marie, gangs going to, and that is what they're doing, because when you look, and I'm sure that the lady, I've been trying to get her back on the program, that is Jemima Pear, but she also understands that in Haiti, that the gang organization there, the gangs are not so far from the U.S. Embassy in Haiti. Now, how is it that the United States wants to get these gangs, and yet still they know where the gangs are? It's not far from the U.S. Embassy, right? I can't remember if she said it was the leader there that lived not far away from the U.S. Embassy in Haiti, right? So what are we talking about? Pedro is saying, if you know your country economic stability depends on the U.S., what would you do? Well, we know that. And what are we doing about it? That's the question that you're asking, Pedro. We know that our economic stability, depends on U.S. compliance. That we have to comply with U.S. diktats. If not, our economies are going to be destabilized. Jamaica learned that in 2010 during the dust. It was not because they only wanted this gang leader in Jamaica. It was because Bruce Golding defied the IMF and the policies and said that he could not do what they were asking him to do, right? And then they used this scenario, and they went down there for him and pretended as if, they're about protecting the country from gangs and all of that, when we know that the United States started gangsterism in Jamaica, and that they knew his father, and all of these other gangs, the CIA, the Shore Posses, and all these gangs in Jamaica, that the CIA created them. Okay, so they didn't want really to do us. It was just a matter of the power play and to send a message to the Caribbean and to the world that when the US asks you to do something economically, you must do it. If you don't do it, they're going to destabilize you. And that's exactly what happened to Jamaica in 2010. Right? Now, fast forward after Dulles left the island of Jamaica, and the IMF said, okay, now that he left, we're going to punish you. And we are not going to sign off on an IMF deal until 2012 or 2013. They took 3 years to sign off on a simple IMF loan deal after dollars had been sent. The Jamaican government says, okay, we'll do whatever you want to do. And even though Jamaicans complied, they say, well, you have to be punished for 3 years. And we're going to ravage your economy, no investment. You can't go to any capital market and borrow anything. And what did they do when Jamaica finally inked out a loan in 2013? They said, okay, you have to run a primary surplus of 7.5%, okay, which devastated the economy, right? Do you see how these people work and behave? If you don't do what they ask you, and if afterwards you comply, they're still going to punish you. They still are going to punish you for, not obeying disobeying in the first place. All right. And many people aren't aware of these things. They just think that, the United States wants to save us. Okay, yes, we have to get dollars out. After dollars left, crime and violence in Jamaica never disappeared. It actually intensified. It went up, a few days, a few months, it went down because the soldiers, the military were on the streets, right? So they controlled the gangs, from that perspective. But what happened? The gangs moved from West Kingston and they went to other parts of Jamaica and started creating, like in Montego Bay, other parts of the island where you wouldn't hear about any crime, even in Mandeville, right? Clarendon, these were sleepy towns, like no crime really were there. The U.S. is very, let me not say the word. So we have Trevor saying, Pedro, the black intellectuals that are pushed with platforms are all initiated in their Freemasonry. Many of them lack value unless they are validated by degrees and elite circles, house Negroes, right? So, and that's what we've been saying, that they're being in Congress or in the parliament doesn't mean, therefore, that they're looking out for your interest. They're not working on your behalf. They're working on behalf of the elites. And that is why perhaps Caribbean blacks in the UK, they know that. Black Americans, they understand that too. Black Caribbeans in the Caribbean, I am not sure we understand that. I'm still not sure if Black Caribbeans understand that there are Black people in Parliament, in Barbadian Parliament, in the Jamaican Parliament, in the Trinidadian Parliament, are not working on behalf of your survival and your prosperity. Not only survival, because we don't only want to survive, we want to thrive, right? We want to prosper. Trevor is also saying, know your worth. And the Haitians want an option to choose between a backyard barbecue and the back home one. Yes, right. And many of the what I find interesting is that some of our Pan-Africanists also are suggesting that the US is actually fighting against gangsterism, and they won't admit that the gangs are really US intellectual they are the ones who are the masterminds behind these gangs, right, in the Caribbean and maybe in the world. Trevor and what Komisang going to do. Right. The fact of the matter is that we're living in a world now where we can't look at people's race anymore. We have to look at their what? Their humanity, their integrity, right? And just understand that they should be decent human beings, whether they're Indians or they're white or they're black or they're whatever, they're purple. We are living in a society now where we have, like the United States, we have adopted this thing about white, black, and who is Afro and who is not Afro, as if that has anything to do with anything. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should not look at history and we should not, try to highlight how, Europeans have dealt with us in the wrong way, right? And continue to do so. But to suggest that because somebody looks like me, it means, therefore, that a person means me well, that is not true. That is far from the truth. And this is where Caribbean people, particularly in the region, this is where we have to change our minds. We've got to re-educate ourselves, because if we don't, then we're going to have heart attack, because some of the things that are coming as the Haitians are learning. Remember now that not because we think the Haitians are some hapless people, and what is happening to them can't happen to us. That is what we have in the Caribbean. Let me repeat that. We think the people in Haiti are just some different people because, the France, went and they, asked them to have reparations. By the way, By the way, why do we often stress that Haitians had to, had to do that, repay that thing for their reparations for their liberty? Why don't we also emphasize that we did it too? The British countries, right? We had to pay England for the slave masters giving us our freedom. So what we're really getting back to is not only reparations. We should be getting, what we should be getting back is money stolen from us after slavery, because the planters lost their plantations, they were compensated. So it was not only a Haitian sort of history that happened to Haitians and they had to pay for their liberation or their liberty. We as well had to do so. So if we think that it's only the Haitians that are hapless and, oh, yeah, they might be the poorest because they were the ones who fought against 3 major empires and won, and they were the instigators of freedom and the bad boys in the region, the bad girls and boys in the region, disruptors of the peace. But at the end of the day, we are heading in that direction also. So let's wake up and understand that. Pedro is saying Europeans fought the Africans to end slavery. Europeans fought the Africans to end slavery. Where did you get that from, Pedro? Am I misunderstanding you, that the Europeans fought the Africans to end slavery? Or fought the Africans so that slavery would not have ended? I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. Trevor is saying, I can't help but laugh. He was the super Pan-Africanist and fighting for poor black people until Motley stuffed him like a turkey with some money, right? That's what buys them money and wealth. You were given a revolutionary illusion. You mean the French Revolution? That's what you're saying, Pedro? Now, we have to understand that this is no time for jokes, because what is ahead of us is not going to be pretty. It's even worse than we are talking about it, right? And maybe only the Haitians understand, and even them not to the full extent, but they've lived it so many years, all their years possibly, and they're seeing that there's nothing that they can do, and they're fighting, but they're not winning. They're just not winning. And that is something that we have to look at. Now, would they perhaps win if we were to join up with them? Or is it because we think that we're different? Just like the Black Caribbeans in Great Britain think that they are different from Africans. And what if they had united, could they fight some of the injustices in Great Britain? How did it end? The British Navy? It ended because the slaves decided that it had to end, and they fought tooth and nail. Britain did not want to end slavery. The French did not want to end slavery. But when the slaves began to burn down stuff and to create anarchy and kill a lot of the planters, they had to end it. Right? It was becoming too unbearable. After the Haitian Revolution, by the way, Britain started to also weaken. It weakened the British Empire. And of course, the French, all these great empires, it weakened them. And that was the beginning of their death. So we could see that the death knell started after the Haitian Revolution. So we have to give them credit. And we need to pay homage to the Haitian people for instigating that revolution and won. Because we have to also understand that if they hadn't won, we wouldn't have had it in our imagination that we could win them. We could win our masters. Because people say that the instigation started in Jamaica with the Maroons, but the Maroons did not accomplish winning the entire battle. They won for themselves. The Maroons won for themselves their liberty, but they did not win for the entire Jamaican people. The Haitian people won for the entire Haitian community. And then they helped other people like the Venezuelans and South America to gain their liberty as well. Trevor is saying, join Haiti, all blacks are taught to look down on them, correct? Yet so we say we're black and we're unified, right? And people come and tell me about their black liberation struggle, and I'm like, okay, when you're looking down on other black people. Many won't admit it, but that's what the mainstream media teaches you unless you search out beyond that. Absolutely. And we think we're different. We think that their struggles will never be our struggles, as you're saying, Trevor. We think that their struggles are just something that is just, it's abnormal, and it's outside of the norm. That would never happen in Barbados, never happen to Trinidad and Tobago, right? But will it? That's the question. They paid others and beg. Now, Pedro, you're talking this, ambiguous, sort of expression. I'm not sure who is they and paid and who begged. Trevor says, no one cannot take away Haiti took their liberty. Right. So we have to stand up for liberty. We have to stand up now for liberty, because we see where the planter class and the politicians are in bed together, and they want to extract from us our liberties. And if we don't stand up and say enough is enough, then that's exactly where Haiti is now, and worse, we're heading in that same direction. And it is going to be a train wreck. It is going to be a train wreck. And we've got to get that situation. So this was a very timely topic. Who contributed to Britain? I think both contributed. Afro-Caribbeans, or British people of Caribbean heritage, they also, contributed, as well as Africans. And it is for us to understand that we have to join hands and hearts together to fight against, these people who would like to enslave us right now. Trevor is saying a hyperinflation is on the way. Remember that. Correct. And Pedro is saying, listen carefully to your last statement. Yes. All right. So what should we discuss tomorrow? I think that we have exhausted this topic. I think great conversation as usual. Please like the live and make sure you share it with as many people on the platform. And because we want these lives to go out. They're educational. And I'm sorry that the algorithm is not seeing the importance of these lives, so people can be educated and informed, and also of your participation. I don't understand, because I've seen lives where it's not as, highly engaged as ours, yet still the algorithm does not want to send it out. Weird, isn't it? But that is how it is, and we can't change it. What do we discuss tomorrow night? Is there anything? And try to try to come on time, because if you don't come on time, then the algorithm is not going to push out the live. What should we talk about tomorrow? I'm seeing in Trinidad that they're talking about data centers in Trinidad. Yes, please hit the like button. Should we talk about that tomorrow with the data centers? I understand that there are data centers with the AI, and that is going to create a lot of, it requires a lot of water. It requires a lot of energy. And how will that impact the economy of Trinidad and Tobago and the quality of life of its citizens? Should we talk about that tomorrow? Or should we talk about Miss Mia Motley and the Africans, importing many Africans to the country of Barbados? What should we talk about tomorrow? Tell me what you want to talk about so I can come here, and you're always engaged, but I want you to come early so that we can have, more people join the live. What should we talk about tomorrow? Please let me hear from you before we go. Oh, Mia Motley conversation. Good. So we will talk about Miss Mia Motley conversation with the Haitians coming, not Haitians, the Africans rather, coming in. All right, good. Yes, a good for Miss Mia Motley. And her discussions tend to generate, even though we're in our lowest part of YouTube journey right now, even when things are not going well, Miss Mia Motley's name generates a lot of interest, right? So thank you so much for joining, and we'll see each other tomorrow, and we'll talk about that, Miss Mia Motley and her, importation of Africans to Barbados. So have a great night. See you tomorrow.